The storm broke over the frontier just as Simon Ryder reached the old stone watchtower, rain hammering down so hard it stung his exposed skin like needles. He had been tracking the bandits for 3 days through increasingly rough terrain, and now he was miles from the nearest settlement with night falling fast and his horse gone lame. The watchtower loomed ahead, half ruined but still standing, and he made for it with water streaming down his face, leading his limping mare by the reins. Thunder rolled across the sky, so loud it seemed to shake the very ground beneath his feet, and in that moment of deafening sound, something massive grabbed his arm with enough force to stop him in his tracks. Simon's hand went to his sword instinctively, but before he could draw it, lightning split the sky and illuminated what held him. She was enormous, easily 7 feet tall with green skin that looked almost black in the darkness and rain. An orc. His first coherent thought was that he was about to die. His second thought, as another flash of lightning lit her face, was that she looked absolutely terrified. Her yellow eyes were wide, pupils dilated, and her breathing came in sharp, rapid gasps. Her grip on his arm was tight but trembling, and as he stared at her in shock, she flinched violently at another crack of thunder. She was not looking at him like prey. She was looking past him at the storm, with the kind of raw fear he had only seen in soldiers who had been through too many battles. "The tower," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Please, inside." She released his arm and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own feet. She wore leather armor that was torn in several places, and now that his eyes had adjusted to the darkness, he could see blood on her shoulder. She was injured, terrified, and asking for help rather than attacking. Every instinct Simon had developed in 10 years as a ranger told him this situation was wrong in ways he could not immediately identify. Another boom of thunder sent her reeling, and she actually fell to her knees, covering her ears with her hands. The gesture was so vulnerable, so utterly un-orcish according to everything he had been taught, that Simon made a decision without fully thinking it through. "Come on," he said, raising his voice over the storm. "Get inside before you drown out here." He did not wait to see if she would follow. He led his horse toward the tower entrance, which was little more than a dark opening in the stone where the door had rotted away decades ago. The interior was dry, if musty, and he tied his mare to a piece of old iron still embedded in the wall. When he turned around, the orc woman was standing just inside the entrance, water streaming off her in rivulets, still shaking. Simon set about making a fire in the old hearth, working quickly with practiced hands. He had flint and steel, and there was dry wood stacked in a corner that some previous traveler had left. As the flames caught and began to spread warmth and light through the space, he finally got a good look at his unexpected companion. She was younger than he had initially thought, probably close to his own age of 24. Her tusks were small and slightly curved, protruding just past her upper lip. Her black hair was plastered to her head and shoulders, hanging in thick, wet ropes. The wound on her shoulder looked like it had been made by a blade, and it was still bleeding sluggishly. She stood with her back pressed against the far wall, as far from the entrance as possible, and every time thunder rumbled, she flinched. "You are hurt," Simon said, keeping his voice level and calm. He used the same tone he would with a frightened animal, which immediately made him feel like a bastard, but he did not know what else to do. "That needs to be cleaned and bandaged." She looked at him properly for the first time, her yellow eyes reflecting the firelight in an unnerving way. "You are not going to kill me?" The question was so blunt and so raw that it took him a moment to respond. "No. Why would I kill you? I am an orc." She said it like it was the most obvious answer in the world. You are injured and afraid of the storm. Sit down before you fall down. She did not move immediately. She studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, as if trying to determine whether this was some kind of trap. Finally, when another boom of thunder made her whole body tense, she moved to the fire and sat down heavily on the stone floor. Up close, Simon could see that she was shaking not just from fear but from cold. Her leather armor was soaked through, and her lips had a faint bluish tint. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, then immediately realized how that sounded. "I mean, you will catch your death if you sit in wet leather all night. I have a dry shirt in my pack." "Why are you helping me?" Her voice was rough, as if she had been screaming or crying or both. Simon pulled his pack over and dug through it until he found his spare shirt. It would be too small for her, but it was better than nothing. "Because you are hurt and cold and terrified, and I am not the kind of man who leaves someone to suffer when I can help." He tossed her the shirt and turned his back to give her privacy. He heard the sounds of her struggling out of her armor and wet clothes, wincing occasionally in what was probably pain from her wound. When she cleared her throat, he turned back around. The shirt was stretched tight across her broad shoulders and did not quite reach her waist, but at least it was dry. She had draped her wet things near the fire to dry. "Let me look at that wound," Simon said, moving closer with his medical kit. He always carried supplies for treating injuries. It had saved his life more than once. She tensed as he approached but did not pull away. Up close, he could smell rain and leather and something else, something earthy and not unpleasant. The wound was a clean slice, probably from a sword, and it looked a day or two old. Someone had tried to stitch it, but the stitches had torn open. "This is going to hurt," he warned her, cleaning the wound with water from his canteen and a strip of clean cloth. She hissed in pain but did not pull away. Her muscles were like iron under his hands, and he could feel the tension thrumming through her entire body. "What is your name?" he asked, partly to distract her and partly because he genuinely wanted to know. "Grukka." She said it quietly, as if she was not sure she should be giving him that information. "I am Simon. Simon Ryder." He finished cleaning the wound and began to apply a salve made from herbs. "What happened to you, Grukka?" For a long moment she did not answer. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the relentless drum of rain on stone. Finally she spoke. "There was a battle. My clan fought with humans over territory near the northern pass. I was struck down, and when I woke up, everyone was gone. I think they thought I was dead." "How long ago?" "2 days. I have been walking south trying to find shelter, trying to." She trailed off, and another boom of thunder made her whole body go rigid. Simon saw her squeeze her eyes shut, her hands balling into fists. He worked quickly to stitch the wound properly this time, using a needle and thread from his kit. She bore it stoically, not making a sound even though he knew it had to hurt terribly. When he was done, he bandaged it with clean cloth and sat back. "There. That should hold if you do not do anything too strenuous for a few days." She opened her eyes and looked at the bandage, then at him. "Thank you." The words sounded strange coming from her, as if she was not accustomed to saying them. Simon nodded and moved back to his side of the fire, putting some distance between them. He pulled out some dried meat and hard bread from his pack and offered half to her. She took it hesitantly, as if expecting him to snatch it back, and when he did not, she ate with the single-minded focus of someone who had not had a proper meal in days. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. Simon found himself stealing glances at her, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he had been taught about orcs. She was not a mindless brute. She was clearly intelligent, capable of speech and complex emotion. The fear in her eyes when the thunder rolled was genuine and deep, the kind of fear that came from trauma rather than simple cowardice. "Why are you afraid of the storm?" he asked finally. She looked at him sharply, as if deciding whether to answer. "When I was young, maybe 8 summers old, lightning struck our camp. It killed my mother and 2 of my brothers. I was standing right next to them." Her voice was flat, emotionless, but her hands were shaking. "I can still smell the burning, still hear the sound they made." Simon felt something twist in his chest. "I am sorry. That must have been terrible. It was a long time ago." But the way she said it made it clear that it might as well have been yesterday. Another crack of thunder shook the tower, and she flinched so hard she nearly dropped the piece of bread she was holding. Without thinking, Simon moved around the fire to sit next to her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. He did not say anything, just sat there, a solid presence in the darkness. After a moment, she let out a shaky breath. "You do not have to be afraid alone," he said quietly. "Not tonight." She turned to look at him, and in the firelight he could see tears tracking down her green cheeks. "Why are you being kind to me? Your people hate mine. We are monsters to you. You do not seem like a monster to me. You seem like someone who has had a very bad few days and needs help." He met her eyes steadily. "My father used to say that kindness costs nothing and means everything. I try to live by that. Your father sounds like he was a good man. He was. He died 5 years ago, but I still hear his voice sometimes, telling me what to do." They lapsed into silence again, but it was more comfortable this time. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the tower, there was warmth and firelight and something that felt almost like companionship. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with both of them. Simon spread out his bedroll and offered Grukka his cloak as a blanket. She accepted it with a murmured thanks and curled up on the opposite side of the fire. Simon lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. He had set out to track bandits and had ended up sheltering with an orc woman who was afraid of thunderstorms. Somewhere in his mind, a voice that sounded like his old captain was telling him this was a mistake, that he should leave at first light and forget this ever happened. But another voice, one that sounded like his father, told him that doing the right thing was often complicated and uncomfortable. He fell asleep to the sound of rain and woke to early morning light filtering through the gaps in the tower walls. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fresh, clean smell and the sound of dripping water. Grukka was already awake, sitting by the cold remains of the fire, wearing her mostly dry armor again. She looked up when he stirred. "Good morning," she said, and there was something uncertain in her voice as if she was not sure what was supposed to happen now. "Morning," Simon replied, sitting up and rubbing his face. "How is your shoulder?" "Better. The pain is less," she paused. "Thank you for everything. I should go now." There was a finality to her words that made Simon speak without thinking. "Where will you go?" "I do not know. South, maybe, away from my clan. They will not want me back, not after failing in battle." She stood up, and he could see the resignation in her posture. "Thank you for your kindness, Simon Ryder. I will not forget it." She moved toward the entrance, and Simon found himself standing up, his mouth opening to say something, anything to make her stay. But what could he say? That she should come with him? That was impossible. He was a ranger in the service of the border lord, and she was an orc. There was no place for her in his world, and yet the thought of her walking off alone into the wilderness, injured and without supplies, made his chest tighten with something that felt uncomfortably like panic. "Wait," he said, and she turned back, surprise written across her features. "My horse is lame. I was planning to rest here for another day anyway, let her recover. You should at least stay until your shoulder is more healed. Another day or two of rest will make a difference." It was a weak excuse, and they both knew it. His horse was only slightly lame and could probably walk by afternoon. But Grukka looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression, and then she nodded slowly. "One more day," she agreed. "Then I will go." That one day turned into 2, and then 3. Simon told himself he was just being cautious, making sure his horse was fully recovered before he set out again. He told himself he was just being kind, making sure Grukka's wound was properly healed before she went on her way. He did not let himself think too hard about the fact that he enjoyed her company, that their conversations by the fire felt more real and honest than most interactions he had with other humans. She was surprisingly easy to talk to, once the initial wariness wore off. She had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard more than once, and she was curious about his life in a way that made him tell stories he had not thought about in years. He told her about growing up on the frontier, about learning to track and hunt from his father, about joining the Rangers when he was 18, and spending the last 6 years patrolling the borderlands. In turn, she told him about orc culture, about the clan structure and the constant struggle for survival in the harsh northern territories. She told him about her training as a warrior, about the pride her mother had taken in her skill with a blade before the lightning took her. She talked about the pressure to prove herself, to be strong and fierce and never show weakness, because weakness meant death in a world where every day was a battle. "It sounds exhausting," Simon said on their 3rd evening together. They were sharing a meal of rabbit he had caught and roasted over the fire, the meat seasoned with wild herbs Grukka had gathered from around the tower. "It is," she admitted. "I spent my whole life trying to be what my clan needed me to be, strong, fearless, brutal. But I am not sure I ever really fit." She looked down at her hands, calloused and scarred from years of fighting. "I used to wonder what it would be like to live differently, to not always be preparing for the next fight. What would you do if you could choose anything?" She was quiet for a long time, and he thought maybe he had overstepped some boundary. Then she said softly, "I would want to grow things, have a garden maybe, see something flourish instead of always watching things die." She laughed, but it was bitter. "That is a stupid dream for an orc." "It is not stupid," Simon said firmly. "It is human, I mean." He fumbled for words. "I mean it is the kind of thing any person would want, peace, a home, a chance to create instead of destroy." She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You are very strange, Simon Ryder. Most humans would have killed me on sight, or at least left me to die in the storm. But you bandaged my wounds and shared your food, and you sit here telling me my dreams are not stupid." She shook her head. "I do not understand you." "Maybe that makes 2 of us, because I do not understand why I am doing this either," he admitted. "I just know that leaving you in that storm felt wrong, and leaving you now would feel wrong too." The air between them seemed to thicken with something unspoken. Grukka looked away first, breaking the moment, and Simon let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He was in dangerous territory now, and he knew it. He was starting to care about her, starting to see her not as an orc but just as Grukka, and that was complicated in ways he did not want to examine too closely. On the 4th day, Simon knew he could not put off leaving any longer. His horse was fully recovered, and Grukka's shoulder was healing well. He had responsibilities, a job to return to, reports to file about the bandits he had been tracking. And yet he found himself moving slowly that morning, taking his time packing his things, putting off the moment when he would have to say goodbye. Grukka seemed to be doing the same thing. She had gathered her few belongings but had not put on her armor yet. She stood by the tower entrance, looking out at the forest with an expression that might have been longing or might have been sadness or might have been both. "I have been thinking," Simon said, his voice sounding too loud in the quiet space. My homestead is about 2 days' ride south of here. It is not much, just a cabin and some land, but it is mine. I inherited it from my father, but I have not had much time to work it because of my ranging duties." He paused, his heart hammering in his chest. "It needs a lot of work. The fences need mending, the garden has gone to weeds, the well needs cleaning. It is too much for one person to manage alone." Grukka turned to look at him, her yellow eyes wide. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that if you want, you could come with me. Help me fix the place up. You said you wanted to grow things. There is land for a garden, room for—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish. "Room for you," he wanted to say, "room for both of us. You would take me to your home, an orc." She sounded disbelieving. "I would take Grukka to my home." "Yes." He met her eyes steadily. "If you want to come, people will see me. They will know what I am. It will cause you trouble." "Probably," he admitted. "But I have dealt with trouble before, and my nearest neighbor is old Gerald Moss, who is half blind and minds his own business anyway. We would be careful, keep to ourselves. It could work." He could see the war playing out across her face, hope fighting with fear, desire battling caution. Finally, she said, "Why would you do this for me?" It was a good question, and Simon decided she deserved an honest answer. "Because in these 4 days, I have come to realize that you are brave and kind and strong in ways that have nothing to do with fighting. Because I think you deserve a chance to have the life you want instead of the life you were told to have. And because—" He took a breath. "Because the thought of you walking off into the wilderness alone makes me feel like I am losing something important." The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Then Grukka crossed the space between them in 3 long strides and stood directly in front of him, close enough that he had to tilt his head back to meet her eyes. "If I come with you and your people discover me, they might kill me," she said. "Or worse, they might kill you for harboring me. You understand this, I understand. And you are still offering, I am still offering." She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded once decisively. "Then I will come. I will help you with your homestead. I will grow things with you." A pause, and then softer, "Thank you, Simon." The journey to Simon's homestead took 3 days instead of 2, because they had to travel carefully, avoiding the main roads and other travelers. Grukka wore a hooded cloak that Simon had in his pack, and she kept her face covered whenever they saw any sign of other people. It was nerve-wracking and exhausting, but they made it without incident. The homestead, when they finally reached it, was exactly as Simon had described. The cabin was small but solid, built from logs with a stone chimney. The land around it had clearly once been well tended but had gone wild in recent years. The garden was a tangle of weeds, the fences were sagging or broken in places, and the well had leaves and debris floating in it. "It is a mess," Simon said apologetically, seeing it through her eyes. "But the structure is sound. We can make it good again." Grukka pulled back her hood and looked around with an expression of wonder that surprised him. "It is beautiful," she said quietly. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." And somehow Simon understood that she was not seeing what it was but what it could be, what they could make it together. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Simon would wake early and start a fire, and Grukka would join him as the sun rose. They would eat a simple breakfast and then set to work. Simon focused on the heavy repairs, mending fences and fixing the cabin's roof where it had started to leak. Grukka threw herself into reclaiming the garden with an intensity that was almost frightening. She worked from dawn until dusk, pulling weeds and turning soil and carefully nurturing the few plants that had survived the neglect. She barely spoke while she worked, but Simon would catch her smiling sometimes, a small, private smile that made his chest feel tight. She had calluses on her hands from fighting, but she developed new ones from working the earth. and she seemed to take pride in each one. In the evenings, they would sit together and share a meal. Simon taught her to cook human food, and she taught him orc recipes that used ingredients he had never thought to combine. Some were terrible, some were surprisingly good, and they laughed together over the failures and successes alike. Slowly, carefully, they built something between them. It was not quite friendship and not yet romance, but something in between. A companionship that felt easy and natural despite all the reasons it should not exist. They talked about everything and nothing. Grukka told him about growing up in the orc clans, about the stories her mother used to tell her before she died, about the strange beauty of the northern wastes in winter. Simon told her about his dreams of making the homestead prosper, about the ranger service and the things he had seen in 6 years of patrolling the frontier, about the aching loneliness of coming home to an empty cabin after his father died. "You have not been lonely since I arrived?" she asked one evening, and there was something careful in the way she phrased it. "No," Simon admitted. "I have not. This feels more like home than it has in 5 years." She did not respond with words, but she moved a little closer to him where they sat by the fire, close enough that their shoulders touched. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact, and Simon felt his breath catch in his throat. He did not move away. The first real test of their arrangement came about 6 weeks after they arrived at the homestead. Simon was out checking the fence line when he saw a rider approaching from the east. He recognized the man immediately and cursed under his breath. It was Tom Saunders, another ranger and someone Simon had worked with on several patrols. Tom was a good man, but not exactly known for his open-mindedness. Simon hurried back to the cabin, where Grukka was working in the garden. "Someone is coming," he said urgently. "You need to hide." "Inside, quickly." She looked at him, then at the approaching rider, and her face went carefully blank. Without argument, she gathered her tools and disappeared into the cabin, closing the door behind her. Simon took a deep breath and tried to look casual as Tom rode up. "Simon." "You hermit, I have been wondering where you have been hiding," Tom said cheerfully, dismounting. "You missed the last 2 patrol rotations. Captain was starting to think you had gotten yourself killed." "Just taking some time to work on the homestead," Simon said, keeping his voice light. "Father left it in rough shape, and I figured I had some leave coming. Fair enough. Place does look better than last time I saw it." Tom glanced around approvingly. "That garden especially. Did not know you had a green thumb. Picked up a few things." Simon could feel sweat gathering at the back of his neck despite the cool autumn air. "What brings you out this way? Actually looking for you. There is talk of a big operation, clearing out an orc warband that has been raiding settlements up north. Captain wants all hands. I was supposed to find you and tell you to report within the week." Simon's stomach sank. He had known this would come eventually. He could not avoid his duties forever. "I will be there," he said. "Tell the captain I will report in 3 days." They talked for a few more minutes, Tom catching him up on news from the ranger post and the surrounding settlements. Every moment felt like an eternity to Simon, waiting for Tom to notice something wrong, for Grukka to make a sound in the cabin, for the whole fragile structure they had built to come crashing down. But finally, Tom mounted up and rode off with a wave, and Simon stood there until he was out of sight before letting out a shaky breath. Grukka emerged from the cabin, her expression troubled. "You have to leave." "Only for a few weeks, maybe a month. I will come back." "They want you to help fight orcs, my people." Her voice was flat. "And you will go." Simon wanted to deny it, to say he would refuse the order, but they both knew that was not an option. If he suddenly refused to do his job, people would ask questions. They would investigate. They would find Grukka. "I have to," he said miserably, "but I will come back, I promise." You might die, I might. That is always a risk. He moved closer to her, taking her hands in his without thinking about it. Her hands were rough and warm, and they dwarfed his own. But I will do everything I can to come back to you, to this. He gestured at the homestead, the garden, the life they were building. She looked down at their joined hands, and when she spoke, her voice was raw. I do not want you to go. I know I have no right to ask you to stay, but I do not want you to go. I do not want to go either. The admission felt like pulling something out of his chest. Grukka, these last 6 weeks have been the happiest I can remember. Coming back here every evening and seeing you in the garden, sitting with you by the fire, just being near you. It means more to me than I know how to say. She looked up at him, and he saw his own feelings reflected in her yellow eyes. Fear and longing and something deeper, something neither of them had been brave enough to name. When you come back, she said slowly, if you come back, we need to talk about what this is, what we are to each other. We do, he agreed. But for now, just know that I am coming back. No matter what happens, I am coming back to you. She pulled him into a hug then, careful of her strength but fierce in her need. Simon wrapped his arms around her as far as they would go and pressed his face against her shoulder. She smelled like earth and growing things and home. They stood there for a long time, holding each other as if they could somehow make the future less uncertain through sheer force of will. Simon left 3 days later, and it felt like tearing off his own skin. He made sure Grukka had plenty of supplies, showed her where he kept his money in case of emergency, and made her promise to be careful and stay hidden. She promised, and he promised to return, and then he rode away without looking back because if he looked back, he did not think he would be able to leave at all. The operation against the orc warband was brutal and efficient. The Rangers joined forces with a company of soldiers from the local lord's garrison, and they struck at dawn on a cold morning when frost still clung to the grass. Simon did his job mechanically, tracking and scouting and fighting when he had to, but his heart was not in it. He kept thinking about Grukka, wondering if any of these orcs knew her, if they had family, if they were afraid. He had fought orcs before and had never thought twice about it. They were the enemy, raiders and killers who preyed on human settlements. But now every face he saw made him think of her. Every orc who fell made him wonder if somewhere, someone grieved for them the way he would grieve if something happened to Grukka. It made him a worse ranger and a better person, or maybe the opposite. He could not tell anymore. The operation lasted 3 weeks. They broke the warband, scattered the survivors, and returned to a hero's welcome. There was a celebration at the ranger post, drinking and boasting and congratulations all around. Simon participated because refusing would have been suspicious, but he felt hollow and sick. He kept thinking about the orc woman who had been clutching a child when the soldiers cut her down, the way she had used her body to try to shield the little one. He kept thinking about how that could have been Grukka in another life, another place. He left as soon as he could without raising suspicion, claiming exhaustion and a need to get back to his homestead. The ride back felt endless, every mile stretched to infinity. What if something had happened while he was gone? What if someone had found her? What if she had decided she could not risk staying and had left? The homestead came into view just as the sun was setting, and Simon felt his heart nearly stop. There was smoke coming from the chimney, light in the windows. And as he rode closer, he could see Grukka working in the garden despite the fading light, harvesting the last of the autumn vegetables before the first hard freeze came. She looked up at the sound of his horse, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Then she dropped her basket and ran to him, and he was dismounting before his horse even stopped moving, and they collided in the middle of the yard in an embrace that felt like coming home and falling and finding solid ground all at once. "You came back," she said, and her voice was shaking. "You actually came back. I promised," he said into her shoulder. "I will always come back to you." They stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other, and Simon realized with absolute clarity that he was in love with her. Completely, utterly, irreversibly in love. And from the way she was holding him like he was the most precious thing in the world, he thought maybe she felt the same way. Later, after they had tended to his horse and gone inside, after they had shared a meal and were sitting by the fire, Grukka said, "Tell me about it. The operation." Simon did not want to, but he owed her honesty. He told her everything. The attack, the fighting, the orcs they had killed or driven off. He told her about the woman and the child, about the sick feeling in his stomach, about how he had kept thinking of her through all of it. When he was done, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That warband has been raiding human settlements for 2 years. They killed dozens of people. Men, women, children. They were not innocents. I know. But neither was everyone in that camp. Some of them were just trying to survive, same as anyone." "Yes." She looked at the fire, her expression distant. "That is the curse of war. There are no clean lines, no simple answers, only difficult choices and people trying to live through them." "I do not want to fight anymore," Simon said suddenly. "I have spent 6 years as a ranger and I am tired of it. Tired of the violence and the killing and the impossible choices. I want to stay here, work the land, grow things, be at peace." "What about your duty, your captain?" "I will tell them I am done. I have served my term. They cannot force me to stay." He turned to her. "I want to build a life here with you if you want that too." She looked at him and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "I want that more than anything." "But Simon, we both know it is not that simple. I am an orc. If people find out I am here, it will destroy you. Your reputation, your standing in the community, maybe your life. Then we will be careful. We will keep you hidden when necessary. We will build a life quietly, away from prying eyes." He reached out and took her hand. "I know it will be hard. I know there will be risks. But I would rather have a difficult life with you than an easy life without you. You barely know me. We have spent, 2 months together. How can you be sure? How long does it take to know that someone is important, that they make your life better just by being in it, that the thought of losing them is unbearable?" He squeezed her hand gently. "I know what I feel, Grukka, and I am not afraid of it." She was crying now, tears streaming down her green cheeks, and she laughed through them. "You are insane. This is insane. We come from different worlds. My people and yours have been enemies for generations. This should not work. But it does work. We work. You cannot tell me you do not feel it too." "Of course I feel it, you fool." She said it with so much emotion that it sounded almost like anger. "I have been falling in love with you since that first night in the tower when you bandaged my wounds and did not ask for anything in return. Every day we spend together, every evening by this fire, every moment working side by side in the garden, I fall deeper. And it terrifies me because I have never felt anything like this, and I do not know what to do with it." Simon felt like his heart might burst. "Then we figure it out together." That is what people do when they love each other. They face the challenges together and find a way through. People, yes. But we are not just people. I am an orc and you are human, and the world will not accept us. Then we make our own world, right here. He gestured around the cabin. "This is our world. These walls, this land, this life we are building. And in our world we make the rules." She pulled him close then and kissed him, and it was clumsy and desperate and perfect. Her tusks made it a bit awkward, and they had to adjust a few times to find an angle that worked, but when they did, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She tasted like the herbal tea they had been drinking and something uniquely her, and Simon never wanted it to end. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grukka rested her forehead against his. I love you, Simon Ryder, and I am still not sure this is wise. Probably not, he admitted. But I love you too, Grukka, and I think that is worth fighting for. They stayed up late that night, talking about the future. What their life might look like, what challenges they would face, how they would handle them. It was daunting and uncertain and full of risks, but it also felt possible in a way that made Simon feel lighter than he had in years. Over the following months, they built their life carefully and deliberately. Simon went to the ranger post and formally resigned from service, citing a desire to focus on his homestead. His captain was disappointed but understanding, and Simon left with his reputation intact and a small pension for his years of service. He became a farmer, working the land and raising chickens and making occasional trips to the nearest town for supplies. Grukka remained hidden when anyone came near, but she poured herself into making the homestead flourish. The garden expanded under her care, producing vegetables in abundance. She learned to preserve food for winter, to mend clothes, to do all the things that made a house a home. She was happy in a way Simon had never seen her, as if she was finally becoming the person she had always wanted to be. Winter came and tested them. The snow fell thick and heavy, and for weeks they were snowed in, cut off from the rest of the world. But inside the cabin, there was warmth and light and love. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and laughing and just being together. Simon taught Grukka to read and write human script, and she proved to be a quick study, devouring the few books he owned and asking endless questions. In turn, she taught him about orc culture and history, about the beauty and complexity of a people he had been taught to see as monsters. She taught him some of her language, and he struggled with the harsh sounds but persisted because it mattered to her. They shared their pasts and built their future, one day at a time. Spring arrived with a rush of green and new life, and with it came a challenge they had been dreading. Old Gerald Moss, Simon's nearest neighbor, showed up unexpectedly one morning. Grukka barely had time to hide in the back room before Gerald was knocking on the door. "Simon, my boy, good to see you," Gerald said cheerfully when Simon opened the door. He was a wiry old man with a weathered face and eyes that were rheumy but not as blind as Simon had hoped. "Thought I would check on you, see how you weathered the winter." "I am well, Gerald. Thank you for checking." Simon tried to keep his body in the doorway, blocking the view into the cabin. "Place looks good. Real good. You have been working hard, I can tell." Gerald craned his neck, trying to see past Simon. "Mind if I come in? My knees are aching something fierce and I could use a sit down." There was no polite way to refuse, so Simon stepped aside and let Gerald in, his mind racing. In the back room, Grukka would be pressed against the wall, barely breathing, praying not to be discovered. Simon poured Gerald some tea and tried to make small talk, but the old man was in a chatty mood. "You know, Simon, I have been noticing some odd things," Gerald said casually. "That garden of yours is bigger than any one person needs, and I could swear I have seen smoke from your chimney at odd hours, like someone was tending the fire all day instead of just morning and evening." Simon's blood ran cold. "I have been working hard on the homestead, trying to make it productive. And there is the matter of those tracks I saw in the snow back in January. Big tracks, too big for you. Thought maybe you had started keeping a horse in the cabin, but that did not make sense." Gerald looked at him shrewdly. "Want to tell me what is really going on, boy?" For a moment, Simon considered lying, maintaining the fiction. But Gerald was looking at him with a knowing expression, and Simon realized the old man had probably figured it out already. He made a decision that was either very brave or very stupid. "If I tell you, I need your word that you will not repeat it to anyone, not a soul." "That's serious, is it? Life and death serious?" Gerald studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You have my word. I have known you since you were a boy, Simon. I owe your father's memory that much." Simon took a deep breath. "Grukka, you can come out." There was a pause, and then the door to the back room opened. Grukka stepped out, and Simon saw Gerald's eyes go wide. To his credit, the old man did not shout or run or go for a weapon. He just stared, taking in her green skin, her tusks, her obvious orcish features. "Well," Gerald said finally, "that explains the tracks. Gerald, this is Grukka. She has been living here with me since autumn. She is not a threat, she is." Simon looked at Grukka, at the fear and pride warring in her expression. "She is the woman I love." The silence stretched out painfully. Finally, Gerald spoke. "You know what people would do if they found out? The ranger service, the local lord, the villagers, they would kill her. Probably kill you too for harboring her. I know. That is why I need you to keep this secret." Gerald was quiet for a long time, sipping his tea and thinking. Then he looked at Grukka. "Can you speak, girl, or just stand there looking fierce?" "I can speak," Grukka said, her voice steady despite the tension. "And I mean no harm to you or to anyone here. I just want to live in peace." You help him with this homestead, the garden and such." "Yes, Simon has given me a home when I had nowhere else to go. I repay that by helping make it prosper." Gerald nodded slowly. "I lost my wife 10 years back. Ellie, her name was. Best woman I ever knew. When she died, I thought I would never smile again. But time passes and life goes on, and you learn that the heart is bigger than you think. Big enough to hold love and loss both." He looked at Simon. "Your father would have done the same thing you are doing. He always said that kindness matters more than rules." Simon felt something unclench in his chest. "So you will keep our secret?" "I will." "But Simon, you need to understand that this cannot last forever. Secrets have a way of coming out, and when this one does, there will be hell to pay. You need to have a plan." "We are working on it," Simon said, though in truth, they had not thought much beyond each day. "For now, we just want to live our lives in peace." "Fair enough. Just be careful, both of you." Gerald stood up, his knees creaking. "And if you ever need help, you come to me. I may be old, but I can still swing a shovel if needed." After Gerald left, Grukka sank into a chair, her hands shaking. "That was terrifying. But he will keep our secret, I trust him." One secret kept, but for how long? "Simon, he is right. This cannot last. Eventually someone else will find out, someone who is not as understanding. Then we deal with it when it happens, together." Simon knelt in front of her and took her hands. "I am not giving up on this, on us. Are you?" She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "No, I am not giving up either, but I am afraid." "So am I, but I would rather be afraid with you than safe without you." Summer came, and with it, a new rhythm. They worked the land together, harvesting vegetables and tending to the small flock of chickens they had acquired. Simon made trips to town for supplies, and Grukka stayed hidden, but she did not seem to mind. She seemed content in their small world, happy in a way that made Simon's heart ache with love for her. They talked about the future more seriously now. About what would happen if they were discovered, about contingency plans and escape routes. They were not naive anymore. They knew they were living on borrowed time, that every day of peace was a gift that could be snatched away at any moment. But they also talked about dreams. About maybe building a larger garden, getting some goats, expanding the cabin. About a future where they might not have to hide, where they could live openly. It was a distant dream, maybe impossible, but they held on to it anyway. The crisis came in late summer, sudden and devastating. Simon was in town when he overheard a conversation in the general store. A group of rangers had been tracking an orc they claimed had attacked a farmstead to the east, and the trail led south, toward his homestead. Simon left his supplies and rode back as fast as his horse could carry him, his heart in his throat. When he arrived, he found Grukka in the garden, working peacefully, unaware of the danger. He could see riders in the distance, at least 5 of them, heading their way. "Grukka, we have to go, now." She looked up, saw his expression, and was on her feet immediately. "What happened, Rangers?" "Coming this way. They are tracking an orc and the trail leads here. We have maybe 10 minutes before they arrive." For a moment he saw panic in her eyes, but then her expression hardened with resolve. "You cannot run with me. It will destroy your life. Everything you have worked for." "I do not care about any of that. I care about you. Simon, listen to me." She grabbed his shoulders, her grip firm. "If we run together, they will hunt us both. You will be an outlaw, forever running. But if you stay, if you tell them you saw an orc and chased it off, they will believe you. You are one of them. You have credibility. I am not letting you run alone. You have to." There were tears in her eyes now. "Simon, I love you. I love you more than I have ever loved anything. But I cannot let you throw away your life for me, not like this. My life is nothing without you in it." He was crying too now, the tears streaming down his face. "Please do not ask me to choose." "I am not asking, I am telling you." She kissed him hard and fierce, pouring everything she felt into it. "Live your life, be happy. And maybe, if the fates are kind, we will find each other again someday." "Grukka, no, please." But she was already pulling away, already grabbing her pack with the few belongings she kept ready for emergencies. She moved to the tree line at the back of the property, and before she disappeared into the forest, she looked back one last time. "I love you, Simon Ryder. Never forget that." Then she was gone, melting into the trees like a shadow, and Simon was left standing in the garden they had built together, his heart shattering into pieces. The Rangers arrived 5 minutes later. Simon met them with a composed face, telling them that yes, he had seen an orc lurking around his property, that he had chased it off into the western woods. They believed him because why would not they? He was Simon Ryder, a former ranger with an impeccable record. They thanked him for the information and rode west, away from where Grukka had actually gone. When they were out of sight, Simon collapsed to his knees in the garden and wept like he had not wept since his father died. The homestead, so full of life and love just an hour ago, felt hollow and empty. Every corner held memories of her. The garden she had nurtured, the cabin they had shared, the bed where they had held each other through long winter nights. All of it was tainted now with the aching absence of the woman he loved. Days passed in a blur. Simon went through the motions of living, tending to the homestead mechanically, but his heart was not in it. He lay awake at night wondering where she was, if she was safe, if she was thinking of him. The not knowing was almost worse than anything else. 2 weeks after Grukka left, Gerald came by and found Simon sitting on his porch, staring at nothing. The old man took one look at him and sighed. "She is gone, then?" Simon nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "You plan to just sit here and waste away. What else can I do? She is out there somewhere, alone, and I am here safe like a coward." Gerald sat down next to him with a groan. "You are not a coward, boy. You are a man in an impossible situation, but let me ask you something. Do you think she wants you sitting here torturing yourself?" "I do not know what she wants, I just know I want her back." "Then go find her." Simon looked at him sharply. "What? You heard me. You are a tracker, one of the best the Ranger Service ever had. You know this territory better than almost anyone. If you really love her, stop sitting here feeling sorry for yourself and go find her. It has been 2 weeks. The trail is cold. Maybe, but you have something other trackers do not. You know her. You know how she thinks, what she would do, where she would go. You told me once that she talked about wanting to see the southern mountains, the ones where wildflowers grow in spring. Did you think she was just talking to hear herself speak? Simon sat up straighter. She had talked about those mountains more than once. She had described them with a longing that suggested they meant something to her, some dream or memory from her past. You think she would go there? I think if she was alone and afraid and did not know where else to go, she might head for the one place that held meaning for her. It is a long shot, but it is better than sitting here doing nothing. Hope flared in Simon's chest for the first time in 2 weeks. If I go after her, if I find her, we can never come back here. We would have to go somewhere far away, somewhere no one knows us, start over completely. Then that is what you do. This homestead is just a piece of land, Simon. Home is where the people you love are. Your father taught you that. Simon looked at the old man, this near stranger who had become an unexpected ally. Why are you helping us? Gerald smiled, and it was sad and knowing. Because I am old enough to know that love is rare and precious and worth fighting for. Because I see the way you look when you talk about her, and it is the way I used to look when I talked about my Ellie. And because the world is hard enough without good people giving up on the things that make them happy. Simon stood up, feeling purpose flood through him for the first time since Grukka left. I need to pack, gather supplies. If I am doing this, I am doing it right. That is the spirit. And Simon, when you find her, and I believe you will, you hold on to her and do not let go. Life is too short for regrets. Simon prepared carefully over the next 2 days. He packed supplies for a long journey, made arrangements for the homestead to be watched over in his absence, and gathered every coin he had saved. If he found Grukka, they would need money to start over somewhere new, somewhere far from the frontier where their story might raise fewer questions. He left at dawn on the 3rd day, riding south with determination in his heart. The mountains Gerald had mentioned were 2 weeks away, maybe more, and there was no guarantee she would be there. But it was the only lead he had, the only thread of hope to follow. The journey was hard. Simon pushed himself and his horse to the limit, stopping only when necessary. He asked careful questions in the few settlements he passed, inquiring about orc sightings without revealing his real purpose. Most people had seen nothing, but in one small village, an old woman mentioned that she had seen tracks near the river, large tracks heading south. It was not much, but it was something. As he traveled, Simon had time to think. About the life they had briefly built together, about the impossibility of their situation, about the future they might have if he could find her. He thought about what Gerald had said, about home being where the people you love are. It was true. The homestead had only felt like home when Grukka was there. Without her, it was just a place. He reached the foothills of the southern mountains on the 10th day of travel. The landscape was rugged and beautiful, with steep valleys and rushing streams. Wildflowers grew in thick carpets across the meadows, just as Grukka had described. It was the kind of place that felt untouched by war and hatred, a place where peace might be possible. Simon began to search systematically, looking for any sign of her. He checked caves and sheltered valleys, followed game trails and old paths. Days passed and doubt began to creep in. Maybe Gerald had been wrong. Maybe she had gone somewhere else entirely. Maybe he would never find her. On the 15th day, when he was beginning to lose hope, he found a campsite. The fire was cold, but not more than a day or 2 old. There were footprints in the soft earth near the stream, large footprints that could only belong to an orc. Simon's heart began to race. He followed the tracks carefully, his ranger training kicking in. They led up a narrow valley, toward a rock formation that offered shelter from the wind. And there, sitting on a flat stone and staring out at the mountains, was Grukka. She looked thinner than he remembered, and there was a sadness in her posture that made his heart ache. But she was alive, she was here, and suddenly nothing else mattered. Simon approached quietly, not wanting to startle her, but she must have heard him because she turned around. For a moment they just stared at each other in disbelief. "Simon," her voice was barely a whisper, "I found you." He was grinning like a fool, tears streaming down his face. "I actually found you." She was on her feet in an instant, crossing the distance between them, and then they were in each other's arms, holding on like drowning people who had found solid ground. She was crying and laughing at the same time, and he was pressing kisses to her face, her tusks, her forehead, anywhere he could reach. "How did you find me? How did you even know where to look? You told me about these mountains, about the wildflowers. I took a chance." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. "I could not let you go, Grukka. I tried for all of about 2 days, and then I realized I would rather spend my life searching for you than spend one more day without you. But your homestead, your life, everything you worked for, means nothing without you. Do you understand? Nothing. You are my home, Grukka. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." She cupped his face in her large hands, and her expression was wondering. "I have been sitting here for days, trying to convince myself to keep moving south, to put more distance between us. But I could not make myself do it. Every day I told myself I would leave tomorrow, and every tomorrow I stayed because this place reminded me of what we talked about building together." "Then do not leave. Do not ever leave me again." He kissed her long and deep, and it felt like coming home. "Come with me. We will go somewhere new, somewhere far away from the frontier. We will find a place where no one knows us, where we can build a life together without fear. Are you sure?" "Simon, if we do this, there is no going back. You will be giving up everything familiar, everything safe. I am giving up nothing that matters and gaining everything I care about." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Grukka. I want to spend my life with you. I want to build a home with you, grow old with you, face whatever challenges come our way together. Will you come with me? Will you let me love you for the rest of our days?" She was crying again, but she was smiling too, the first real smile he had seen on her face since the Rangers came. "Yes. Yes, I will come with you. I will love you for the rest of my days and beyond." They held each other as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. And in that moment, with the woman he loved in his arms and the whole future stretching out before them, Simon felt something he had not felt in weeks. Hope. They traveled south for another month, moving slowly and carefully. They avoided major settlements and stuck to wilderness areas where orcs and humans both were rare. Simon's skills as a tracker and ranger kept them fed and safe, and Grukka's strength and determination kept them moving even when the terrain was difficult. They talked endlessly as they traveled, planning their future. They would find a remote valley somewhere, build a small homestead far from prying eyes. They would be cautious but not paranoid, careful but not afraid. They would build the life they had started to create back at Simon's old homestead, but this time without the constant fear of discovery. Eventually, they reached the southern coastal regions, where the climate was milder and the population more diverse. There were ports there where people from many lands came to trade, places where a human and an orc together might not draw as much attention. They settled in a small valley a day's ride from the nearest port town, purchasing land with the money Simon had saved and starting to build their new home. It was not easy. The first year was hard, full of back-breaking work and uncertainty, but they had each other and that made everything bearable. They built their cabin together, cleared land for a garden together, faced every challenge together. And slowly, gradually, they created something beautiful. Grukka's garden flourished, even more spectacular than the one she had started at the old homestead. She grew vegetables and herbs and flowers, creating a riot of color and life. Simon built furniture and fences, hunted and fished, and occasionally took work as a guide for traders who needed to navigate the inland routes. They were careful about who they let close, but they were not isolated. They had a few neighbors who accepted them without judgment, people who valued character over species. 2 years after they settled in their valley, Simon woke one morning to find Grukka already up, standing in the doorway of their cabin and looking out at the sunrise. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back into him with a contented sigh. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how strange life is. 2 years ago, I was a warrior in an orc warband, fighting and killing and never thinking about tomorrow. Now I am here with you, growing flowers and vegetables and living in peace. Sometimes it does not feel real. It is real. We made it real." He kissed her shoulder. "Are you happy?" She turned in his arms and looked at him with those yellow eyes that he loved so much. "Happier than I ever thought possible. You gave me a life I did not know I could have, Simon. You gave me hope and love and a place to belong. You gave me the same things. Before you, I was just going through the motions. Now every day feels like it matters." They stood there in the doorway, watching the sun rise over their valley, over the life they had built together against all odds. It had not been easy, and there were still challenges ahead. The world was not kind to those who defied its expectations. But they had each other, and they had learned that love was stronger than prejudice, that hope was more powerful than fear, that two people from different worlds could create something beautiful together. Over the following years, their life in the valley became rich and full. They expanded their homestead, adding a small barn for the goats they acquired, a larger garden, and even a small orchard. Grukka became known in the nearby port town as someone who grew the most remarkable produce. And while some people were wary of her at first, her quiet dignity and Simon's presence helped smooth things over. They made friends, carefully and slowly. There was Maria, a human woman who ran a bakery in town and who traded bread for Grukka's vegetables without ever asking questions about their relationship. There was Karn, an old half-orc sailor who had settled in the area and who treated Grukka like family. There was the priest, Father Benedict, who believed that any love built on kindness and commitment was blessed, regardless of the circumstances. 5 years after they settled in the valley, Simon asked Grukka to marry him. It was a simple proposal, made in their garden on a warm summer evening. He had carved her a ring from oak wood, inlaid with a small emerald that had cost him 3 months of work. She cried when he asked, and she said yes, and they were married a month later in a simple ceremony on their land. Father Benedict performed the service, and Gerald, who had made the long journey south to attend, stood as Simon's witness. Maria and Karn and a handful of their other friends attended, and they celebrated with food and drink and dancing under the stars. It was not a grand wedding, but it was perfect because it was theirs. Their life was not without difficulties. There were still people who looked at Grukka with suspicion or hatred, who muttered about abominations and unnatural unions. There were times when old prejudices surfaced, when they had to be careful about where they went and who they spoke to. But these challenges only made them hold each other tighter, appreciate each other more. 7 years after that first night in the tower during the storm, Grukka told Simon she was pregnant. He was stunned and terrified and overjoyed all at once. They had not planned for a child, had not even been sure it was possible for a human and an orc to have children together. But life, as always, found a way. The pregnancy was difficult. Grukka was sick often in the early months, and as the baby grew, it was clear that the child was larger than a human baby would be. Simon worried constantly, fearing for Grukka's health, but she faced it with the same quiet strength she brought to everything. Maria found them a midwife who was willing to help without judgment, an elderly woman named Nora who had delivered hundreds of babies and had seen enough of life to not be shocked by anything. The birth was long and hard, lasting through an entire day and night. Simon stayed by Grukka's side the whole time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement even as he felt helpless and afraid. But when the sun rose on the second day, they heard a strong, lusty cry, and Nora placed their daughter in Grukka's arms. She was perfect. She had green-tinged skin, lighter than Grukka's but darker than Simon's, and small tusks that would grow as she aged. Her eyes were a striking amber color, somewhere between Grukka's yellow and Simon's brown. She had a shock of black hair and tiny pointed ears, and the most beautiful face Simon had ever seen. "What should we name her?" Grukka asked, exhausted but radiant with joy. Simon looked at his daughter, this miraculous being who represented everything he and Grukka had built together, all the love and hope and defiance of a world that said they should not exist. "Hope," he said. "Let us call her Hope." Grukka smiled through her tears. "Hope, yes, that is perfect." Raising Hope was the greatest adventure of their lives. She grew quickly, strong and healthy and curious about everything. She learned to walk earlier than expected, to talk in both human common tongue and the orc language Grukka taught her. She had her mother's strength and her father's curiosity, and she was loved beyond measure. The community's reaction to Hope was mixed. Some people welcomed her, seeing her as a symbol of what was possible when differences were set aside. Others saw her as an aberration, proof that Simon and Grukka's union was wrong. But most people, once they met Hope, could not help but be charmed by her. She had her father's friendly nature and her mother's determination, and she won hearts wherever she went. As Hope grew, Simon and Grukka made sure she understood both sides of her heritage. They taught her about human culture and history, but also about orc traditions and values. They wanted her to be proud of who she was, to see her mixed heritage as a strength rather than a weakness. It was not always easy. There were times when Hope came home crying because other children had called her names, times when Simon wanted to rage at the unfairness of a world that could not accept his daughter. But they taught her to hold her head high, to be proud of herself, and to meet prejudice with dignity rather than anger. Years continued to pass, and the valley became truly home. Simon and Grukka grew older, their hair graying and their bodies showing the marks of hard work and time. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experiences and the family they had created. Hope grew into a remarkable young woman, strong and kind and fiercely protective of her family. She had friends among both humans and the few orcs who lived in the coastal region, and she moved between both worlds with a grace that amazed her parents. She wanted to be a healer, she told them when she was 15, to help people regardless of their race or background. Simon and Grukka supported her dream, arranging for her to apprentice with a physician in the port town who was willing to teach her. On the 20th anniversary of that night in the tower, Simon and Grukka sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Hope was in town, studying with her mentor, and the homestead was quiet and peaceful. "Do you ever regret it?" Grukka asked suddenly. "Giving up your old life for this?" Simon looked at her in surprise. "Never, not for a single moment, do you?" "No. I just wonder sometimes what would have happened if you had not found that tower, if the storm had not driven us both to the same place. Our lives could have been so different. We would have been so much poorer for it." Simon took her hand, large and calloused and familiar. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grukka. You and Hope. This life we have built together. I would not change a moment of it." She squeezed his hand gently. "I love you, Simon Ryder. Even after 20 years, even though you snore and leave your boots everywhere and talk to the goats like they can understand you," he laughed. "And I love you, even though you are stubborn and competitive about your garden and you hog all the blankets." They sat in comfortable silence, two people from different worlds who had somehow found each other in a storm and built a love that defied all logic and expectation. They had faced prejudice and hardship, fear and uncertainty. But they had also known joy and love, and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful together. Their story was not a simple one, and the world they lived in was far from perfect. But in their valley, in their home, they had created a space where love mattered more than race, where two people could be partners and equals regardless of where they came from. They had proven that bridges could be built between even the most divided peoples, that understanding could triumph over hatred, that love was always worth fighting for. As the sun set on that anniversary evening, Simon and Grukka sat together, their hands intertwined, their hearts full. They had built a life, raised a daughter, and created a home where love was the only rule that mattered. They had made their own world, and it was beautiful. Behind them, the cabin door opened, and Hope came home early, carrying fresh bread from Maria's bakery and calling out a cheerful greeting. She joined her parents on the porch, settling between them and leaning her head on her mother's shoulder while taking her father's hand. The three of them sat together, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. A family bound not by what the world said was possible, but by what their hearts knew was true. And in that moment, in that place, surrounded by the people he loved most in the world, Simon understood with perfect clarity what his father had tried to teach him so many years ago. That kindness cost nothing and meant everything. That love was the only force strong enough to bridge any divide. That home was not a place, but a feeling, a sense of belonging that came from being with the people who mattered most. He had found that home in a storm, in a terrified orc woman who grabbed his arm and changed his life forever. And he had spent every day since building on that foundation, creating something that would last not just for his lifetime but for generations to come. Because love, real love, the kind that was built on respect and partnership and unwavering commitment, that kind of love could change the world. Their story would continue, of course. Hope would grow and have adventures of her own, would face her own challenges and build her own bridges. Simon and Grukka would grow old together, their love a quiet constant in a changing world. The prejudices they had fought against would not disappear overnight, but every day they lived openly and honestly. Every person they convinced to see beyond race to the person beneath was a small victory. Years later, when Simon was old and gray and looking back on his life, he would remember that night in the tower with perfect clarity. The storm, the fear in Grukka's eyes, the moment he chose kindness over caution. He would remember every choice that followed, every challenge they faced together, every moment of joy and sorrow and love. And he would know, with absolute certainty, that he had lived a good life. Not an easy life, perhaps not even a comfortable life by some standards, but a life rich with meaning and purpose and love. And in the end, that was all that mattered. That he had loved and been loved, that he had built something beautiful with Grukka, that they had raised a daughter who would carry their legacy of love and acceptance into the future. That they had proven, through their simple act of choosing each other every day for decades, that love could overcome anything. The stars shone bright over their valley that night, as they had shone on countless nights before, and would shine on countless nights to come. And in their cabin, the family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and safe and home. Together, They had built something that would endure, a testament to the power of love to overcome fear, prejudice, and hatred. A testament to the simple truth that when you choose kindness, when you choose love, you can change not just your own life but the world itself. Their story, begun in a storm with a terrified orc woman grabbing a lonely ranger's arm, had become a love story for the ages. A reminder that the most powerful force in the universe was not strength or magic or violence, but the simple, revolutionary act of choosing to love someone the world said you should fear. And in choosing that love, they had created miracles.